Church. Welcome back to our series, Enjoy. Hope you're having a good start to your day. Appreciate you tuning in, being with us as we're moving into the fourth chapter of the book of Philippians. And we've already looked at the first three chapters, different thieves of our joy and the response to those thieves, or the solution really to those thieves. And we started in chapter 1 looking at circumstances, Paul being in prison, and looking at different things that had fallen out, that had happened to him, have fallen out rather into the furtherance of the gospel. He mentions there in verse number 12, and looking at his own circumstances and having a single mind, having a focused mind, and trying to focus through circumstances, trying to keep a focus on Jesus in the midst of all the circumstances and the craziness of life and all the setbacks and hardships that you go through, trying to keep a perspective that the Lord's allowed it for something, and I'm going to use it for His glory and work through the circumstances, but not allowing the circumstances to overwhelm me and to rob me of my joy. Then we looked in chapter 2 and looking at people and how people can be a great source of consternation and problems and chafing, and it can rob us of our joy if we're not careful. The different relationships we deal with are people that we bump into, and he focused heavily on having a submissive mind in chapter 2, and let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, and using Christ as our ultimate example, and then looking at some other examples as well in chapter 2, but having humility being really at the forefront of that, and the submissive mind, submitted to the will of God, and learning to walk in humility, which is a constant struggle against our own flesh and carnality. Chapter 3 we just finished up yesterday as we were looking at things and how things can rob us of our joy. And the focal point, or the solution to that, is maintaining a spiritual mind, and really contrasting material things or directions, attitudes, cares, whatever you want to put it onto, contrasting that with a more spiritual mindset. And we looked at the past, present, and future of Paul and all the different ins and outs of that. We're moving into chapter 4 today, and chapter 4 is an interesting chapter. It really kind of brings everything together. And chapter 4, the focus of chapter 4, the thief of chapter 4, if you could put it in a category, would really be worry itself. And just worrying. And it's amazing how worry causes so many problems in life. Doctors have studied worry and stress and anxiety and the effects that it has on the human body physically, and how it wears you down, and how it can have mental problems, and just so many different ramifications and consequences to constant worry and that stress and anxiety that just bounces on us and rests on us constantly. And Paul is going to lift this up and give us the solution to it, which is going to be the secure mind. Really, that's going to come from the very first verse, and that's going to set the pace for the rest of the chapter, all the way to the end of the book here. So verse 1, he says, "Therefore, my brethren, dearly beloved and longed for, my joy and crown." He looks at these people as his own personal joy and crown. He had invested in them. They're living for the Lord. Just their continuing with the Lord and their faithfulness to the Lord produced a level of joy in him. And that's not really what we're focusing on today, but I'll tell you this. You ought to be faithful, if nothing else, just for the people who have invested in you and what that will mean to them. And somebody reached you for Christ. Somebody gave you the gospel. Somebody told you about the Lord. Somebody brought you the truth and invested in you. Somebody discipled you. Somebody brought you to where you are today and invested in your life and your walk with the Lord. We should be faithful for the Lord above all things. But if no other reason on earth, for the people who have invested in us. And it does produce joy when we can see the ones that we've invested in continuing with the Lord. And certainly Paul brings that out. You are my joy and my crown. You give me joy, and you are my reward. And he sees them that way. But then he says this, and this is really the crux of this chapter. "So stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved." That expression, stand fast. We think of fast as like quick, but that's not really the idea here. Fast, you think of like a fastener. You go to the hardware store, you go to the hardware section, and you go down to the fastener section of that aisle, and you'll see what? Nails and screws and bolts and these different things to do what? To secure one thing to another. That's the idea of a fastener. And she says, stand fast in the Lord, secure in the Lord. Be secure in Christ. This is not your eternal security in your salvation. This is in your mind and in the resolve of you resting in Him and you allowing your emotional equilibrium to rest on Him. Let Him carry your burdens. Let Him carry the weight of your concern and your anxiety. Let it be fastened and secured on Christ. That's the purpose of this chapter here. And he says, stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved. He said, well, how do you do that? How can you just stand fast in the Lord? That's easy to say that. Where's some practical ways I can go about that? Well, he's going to give a few things. Let me just give you some ideas this morning. He's going to mention a couple people here by name, and they're having some tension between one another. And he says, I beseech Euodias and beseech Syntyche that they be of the same mind in the Lord. In other words, learn to get along with one another. It hurts when they're just so carnal and they can't get along. The same mind in the Lord. And I treat thee also, true yoke fellow, help those women which labor with me in the gospel, with Clement also, with other my fellow laborers whose names are written in the book of life. And he says, just help them get along together, one another. If you're having strife with somebody else and you can't get along, this touches a little bit on what we talked about in chapter 2. But when you're at each other's throats, you have no rest, you have no peace. There's certainly no joy there. He said, resolve some conflict. You got to learn to get along with each other. And tell these women who both are saved, these are both Christian ladies in the Lord, who just keep chafing with each other. Learn to resolve those issues. I find for myself that if somebody is just antagonistic, or maybe it's just a personality conflict, and they're acting in a way, maybe it's just because of their person, how they go about things, but it chafes against me. I find this, if I fire back at that, all it does is throw gasoline on the fire. I've got to learn to not answer back when it's a point of conflict there, because a lot of times that answering back is just my flesh, my pride, saying, yeah, but, and I want to get the last word in, or I want to be the one to turn that person. I want to be the one to show that they're wrong, and that's just my flesh. There's nothing spiritual about that. And that's just chafing and strife. I've got to learn to just rest and rest in the Lord. And I got to learn to get along with one another. Even personalities clash between me and other Christians, which is a very real thing. But he goes on, verse 4. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. I've mentioned before, there is a slight difference between always and always. They can be used interchangeably at times. But when you're differentiating between the two, always means all the time. Always, without the S on the end, specifically means at every instance, meaning anytime you have an opportunity, this is what should be done. So rejoice in the Lord always. And the idea there is whenever you have an opportunity in a moment, in a particular moment, how should I go about things? I need to be rejoicing in the Lord in this instance and over here when this happens and when this happens. And again, I say rejoice. Learning to rejoice, and that really is kind of a reaction to things. So when worry comes, when problems come, when anxiety comes, to stir up that joy once again. To rejoice means to have joy again. So I got to stir it back up again. I had it once. I need to stir it back up again. And when I have an opportunity to worry, when I have an opportunity to stress, when I have an opportunity to be anxious, instead, I need to rejoice. I need to pause, and I need to decide to rejoice in the Lord. That's what it means by always. So it kind of, you have points of decision along the way in life, usually several times in a day. And in those instances, I need to decide to rejoice. I need to decide to exercise joy and to operate in joy. Now, I get it. That's a struggle. That can be a struggle, but we can do it. We just have to force ourselves to do it. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. And then let me give you this last thought here. Let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. That word moderation, it doesn't mean a little bit here and there. The word moderation literally means gentleness, and it means sweet reasonableness. This certainly would speak back to that point of conflict. I'm having some chafing, and I need to be known for being a gentle person. I need to be known, I need to work at being known for gentleness rather than rage. I need to work at being known for being gentle, kind, approachable, somebody that if somebody has something, they can come to me without fear that I'm just going to bite their head off. There's some people like that. They just look for opportunities to just lash out. That's not moderation. Sweet reasonableness means that you can be reasoned with. You have rationale. You're not just a hothead all the time. Someone can come to you and say, "Hey, well, what about this? How about we think about it this way?" And you will logically think through that. You'll have a critical analysis. I don't mean a critical spirit. That's all I mean. I mean critical thinking. Be able to logically think through things on an objective level instead of a subjective level, that are tied up in all emotions and everything, get all just raging mad or passionate about one thing without thinking logically through it. So all this stuff that's the idea of let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. In other words, keep in mind the Lord's watching, the Lord's on his way back. And so that needs to be the motivation behind me thinking properly and behaving myself appropriately. So what does that have to do with joy? So much. Because how I function on my daily level and my daily routines and going about things, that plays a huge part on how much joy I receive in my own life and how much joy I'm functioning in. And or I can decide to not operate in those things, and I'm going to deal with a lot of worry, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety over just life, and a lot of problems that I'm going to face. We're all going to face problems, but dealing with those problems with the security of Christ in place, not just eternally, but practically, is key to maintaining my joy. So I don't know what kind of stress levels you're dealing with. Maybe you have a lot of stress in your family right now. Maybe there's some sick loved ones. Certainly in our church, I know there's a lot of people battling illnesses right now. And that can be a major source of anxiety, and not to minimize the situation whatsoever, but stand fast in the Lord. Let yourself be secured in Christ. And I like the psalmist where he's writing and God is talking back to him and says, "Be still and know that I am God." And you have that imagery of just being fastened. Sit still and let God pour his peace into you. And we all need that. And that's going to help us with our joy. So whatever you're battling today, I hope these things will be a help to you. Join us again next time for our next installment of Enjoy. Thanks so much. God bless.